Keir Starmer is in full-blown panic mode. The lawsuit he never saw coming has landed right at his doorstep, and Liz Truss is making sure he feels the heat. For months, Starmer has built his entire economic credibility on a single claim, that Liz Truss single-handedly crashed the UK economy. It has been his go-to excuse, his golden ticket, the shield he has wielded every time his policies come under fire. But now, Truss is fighting back with legal force, and Starmer's carefully constructed narrative is falling apart. Look at him. The once confident, self-assured opposition leader now oozes nervousness. His speeches, once delivered with conviction, are now laced with hesitation and defensiveness. His body language betrays his growing fear, his team is scrambling to control the fallout, and the media can smell blood in the water. And that's just the beginning. Because while Starmer battles this legal nightmare, another scandal is exploding. This time, it's not about what he says, it's about what he does. While telling struggling Brits to tighten their belts, Starmer has been quietly enjoying a life of luxury, raking in over £100,000 in lavish gifts and perks. Expensive dinners, first-class travel, five-star accommodations, all funded by wealthy donors, while millions of Britons struggle to pay their bills. This is hypocrisy at its most blatant. And the British people are finally waking up to the truth. Liz Truss has had enough. After months of being blamed for the UK's economic struggles, she has hit back in the strongest way possible, through legal action. A cease and desist letter has landed on Starmer's desk, demanding that he immediately stop making false claims about her role in the economy's downturn. This is not just a political spat, it is a direct legal challenge to the foundation of Starmer's economic messaging. For months, Starmer has relied on one simple phrase whenever his government's failing policies come under scrutiny: Liz Truss crashed the economy. He's used it to justify painful tax hikes, brutal spending cuts, and the financial misery facing millions. Every time he is questioned about rising living costs, inflation, or soaring energy bills, he rolls out the same line, pinning the blame on Truss's brief tenure as Prime Minister. But here's the problem: Truss isn't staying silent anymore. Her legal team has made it clear that these statements are not only misleading, but also defamatory. The letter demands an immediate retraction and a full public apology. And this is where Starmer's nightmare truly begins. Because the moment he is forced to defend his claims in court, the entire narrative unravels. The real economic facts will be laid bare. Starmer will no longer be able to spin his version of events for political gain. His entire strategy has been built on deception, and now, he's being dragged into a legal battle where facts, not spin, will determine the outcome. His reaction speaks volumes. Instead of facing the lawsuit head-on, Starmer is desperately avoiding the topic. At a recent press conference, when asked directly about Truss's legal action, he abruptly changed the subject and refused to engage. During Prime Minister's questions, his usual aggressive posture was replaced by stiffness, his responses short and calculated, his discomfort palpable every time the issue was raised. This is not the behavior of a leader on solid ground. This is the reaction of a man who knows he's in serious trouble. And the timing of this lawsuit could not be worse for Starmer. Public frustration with his leadership is mounting. The economy is struggling under his watch, and his promises of stability have amounted to nothing. Now, Truss's lawsuit is forcing him to answer for his words, and he is running out of excuses. If the case moves forward, Starmer could be forced to provide actual economic evidence to back his claims, something he has been unwilling, or unable, to do so far. But make no mistake, Truss isn't just bluffing. She has assembled a top-tier legal team, and they are prepared to take this fight as far as necessary. If Starmer doesn't retract his statements, he could face a defamation case that would expose just how misleading his economic claims have been. And here's where it gets even worse. The media is already catching on. While Starmer's allies are working overtime to downplay the lawsuit, independent journalists are digging deeper. Reports are emerging that Starmer's team has been pressuring media outlets to avoid covering the legal action. But the truth is spreading regardless. The question is no longer whether this lawsuit is serious. The question is how far it will go, and how much damage it will do to Starmer's already fragile reputation. And just when you think it couldn't get worse, another scandal emerges. One that shatters any illusion of moral authority Starmer had left. While he's been busy lecturing the British people about sacrifice, Starmer has been living a life of excess, funded by wealthy donors. The numbers are staggering. Corporate-sponsored luxury perks, exclusive events, private dining at London's most expensive restaurants, all while ordinary Brits struggle to heat their homes. The hypocrisy is undeniable. This is the same man who criticizes the Conservative Party for being too close to big business. Yet, here he is, pocketing luxury gifts from the very elites he claims to oppose. And here's the real question: what are these donors getting in return? Because let's be honest, no one hands out £100,000 in perks without expecting something in exchange. Starmer has trapped himself in his own web of deceit. He wants the public to see him as a man of the people, but his actions expose the truth. He is just another career politician, deeply embedded in a system where money talks and principles come second. His repeated calls for economic responsibility now ring hollow. His own financial irresponsibility is now laid bare for the world to see. Even members of his own party are growing uneasy. Whispers of dissent are spreading through the Labour ranks. Reports suggest that some within the leadership fear this scandal could become a major liability, especially with a general election looming. And then, the final blow, Liz Truss's lawsuit advances. More evidence emerges, revealing that Starmer's team knew their economic claims were false, but pushed them anyway. Internal emails expose how Labour deliberately spun false data to mislead the public. The backlash is immediate and brutal. Labour is imploding from within. Starmer's once loyal allies are jumping ship. Internal polling numbers plummet. The media turns against him. And then, the moment of reckoning arrives. Starmer, cornered, out of options, and drowning in scandal, resigns. The man who promised change has been exposed as the very thing he claimed to oppose. And Liz Truss? She emerges vindicated, her political reputation restored, while Starmer's legacy crumbles into dust. Keir Starmer's reaction says it all. A man who once thrived on confidence and composure now appears shaken, defensive, and utterly out of his depth. The lawsuit from Liz Truss has landed like a bombshell, and rather than addressing it head-on, he's running from it at all costs. In a recent press conference, when faced with direct questions about the legal action, he abruptly changed the subject, dodging the issue as if the mere mention of it could unravel everything. But it's not just his words that betray him, it's his body language. At Prime Minister's questions, he looked tense, his posture rigid, his responses short and rehearsed. Every time the lawsuit was mentioned, his discomfort was visible, and for someone who has built his political brand on the idea of being calm, collected, and unflappable, this shift is impossible to ignore. And let's be clear, this could not have come at a worse time. Public frustration with Starmer's leadership has been mounting for months. The economy is still in crisis, his promises of stability have led to nothing but disappointment. And now, with Truss forcing him to answer for his words, his usual tactics of deflection and spin are failing. If this case moves forward, and every indication suggests it will, Starmer may be forced to provide actual economic evidence to support his claims. And that is exactly what he does not want. Because for all his rhetoric, he has never presented solid proof that Liz Truss alone was responsible for the UK's economic downturn. The moment this goes to court, the illusion crumbles. But let's not mistake this for a political stunt. Liz Truss isn't bluffing. She has assembled a formidable legal team, and they are prepared to take this fight all the way. If Starmer does not retract his statements, he could face a defamation case, one that would not only humiliate him publicly but also force the media to scrutinize his economic claims like never before. And that is where the real danger lies. Because up until now, Starmer has been protected. His allies in the media have downplayed his contradictions, amplified his attacks, and shielded him from real scrutiny. But this time, the truth is slipping through the cracks. Reports are emerging that Starmer's team has been actively pressuring journalists to ignore the lawsuit, a desperate move that only raises more questions. If he truly had the facts on his side, why try to silence the coverage? Why not confront it directly? And if that wasn't enough to put his leadership in jeopardy, another scandal is rapidly unfolding, one that exposes his hypocrisy on a whole new level. While Starmer tells struggling families to brace for tax hikes and financial hardship, he has been living a life of pure luxury, funded by powerful corporate donors. The numbers are staggering. Over £100,000 in undisclosed gifts, lavish hospitality, and high-end perks, quietly funneled to him while he lectures the British public about economic responsibility. This isn't just political hypocrisy, it's a full-blown credibility crisis. For months, he has positioned himself as the leader who understands the struggles of working-class Britain, constantly speaking of fairness and sacrifice. But behind closed doors, his lifestyle tells a different story. First-class travel, 5-star accommodations, exclusive VIP events, expensive fine dining at London's most elite restaurants, all bankrolled by the very kind of corporate interests he claims to oppose. And let's not pretend this money came with no strings attached. Nobody donates six-figure sums to a politician without expecting something in return. So what exactly have these donors secured from Starmer? What policies, what favorable treatment, what access have they been granted? And how does any of this align with the values he claims to champion? It's a damning contradiction. On one hand, he rails against wealth and privilege, demonizes corporate influence, and calls for higher taxes on businesses and individuals. On the other, he happily benefits from the generosity of the elite. This is not the behavior of a man fighting for ordinary people. This is the behavior of an opportunist, someone who plays the game of politics for personal advantage while pretending to be different. And the British people are taking notice. Even within Labour, the whispers of discontent are growing. Some MPs are beginning to question whether Starmer is becoming a liability. With a general election on the horizon, Labour cannot afford a leader engulfed in scandal, whose credibility is being torn apart on multiple fronts. And make no mistake, this is not going away. Because now that the cracks have started to show, more questions are surfacing. What else has he been hiding? How deep does this go? And what other scandals are waiting to explode? The media, once willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, has no choice but to dig deeper. Political opponents are seizing the moment, exposing every inconsistency, every contradiction, every lie he thought he could get away with. And then comes the worst possible development for Starmer. Truss's legal team presses forward. Documents leak. Emails emerge. And suddenly, it's not just about whether he defamed Truss. It's about whether he deliberately misled the public about the state of the economy. And that is where his position becomes truly untenable. Because if evidence proves that Starmer's team knowingly manipulated data, that they misrepresented facts to score political points, that they intentionally deceived the British people to build a false narrative, then we are no longer just talking about a political scandal. We are talking about a political reckoning. And if this goes to court, if he is forced to testify, if Labour's internal communications are scrutinised under legal investigation, then this could become the biggest scandal to hit the opposition in years. At that point, it is no longer a question of whether he can win the next election. It is a question of whether he can even survive as leader. Because Labour's own MPs will not stand by and let this drag the party down. If internal polling starts collapsing, if key constituencies start slipping away, if donors and unions begin to withdraw support, then the conversation shifts from defending Starmer to replacing him. And with every passing day, that reality inches closer. So the real question is, how much longer can Starmer keep up the illusion? His economic narrative is collapsing. His credibility is in free fall. His leadership is on the verge of implosion. And Liz Truss? She has exposed the cracks in his foundation, and now, it is only a matter of time before the entire structure comes crashing down. Keir Starmer is fighting to keep control of the narrative, desperately attempting to shift attention away from Liz Truss's legal assault. But just as he tries to navigate this political minefield, another scandal explodes. One that doesn't just damage his credibility but threatens to destroy the very image he has spent years cultivating. For months, Starmer has presented himself as the leader who understands the struggles of ordinary Britons, the man who champions economic responsibility and calls for shared sacrifice in difficult times. Yet behind the scenes, he has been living a life of unparalleled luxury, funded by the very elite he claims to oppose. Let's talk about the numbers, because they are staggering. Over £100,000 in lavish gifts, high-end perks, and VIP treatment, all quietly handed to Starmer while millions of Britons struggle with rising costs, soaring energy bills, and punishing tax hikes. First-class flights, 5-star hotels, exclusive VIP tickets to elite sporting events, private fine dining at London's most expensive restaurants. And all of it paid for by the wealthy donors and corporate interests he pretends to stand against. How is this acceptable? How can a man who lectures the British public on financial restraint and responsibility justify indulging in such extravagance, all while his policies push families to the brink? This is not just double standards, this is outright deception. Starmer has built his public persona on the claim that he represents working-class Britain, that he is fighting for the people who struggle to make ends meet. But when the cameras aren't rolling, he is rubbing shoulders with the ultra-wealthy, dining in the kind of establishments that charge more for a single meal than a struggling family spends on food in a month. And let's not be naive, these donors aren't handing out six-figure perks out of the kindness of their hearts. So, what exactly are they getting in return? Because nobody finances a politician's extravagant lifestyle without expecting political favors in exchange. Starmer has positioned himself as an enemy of corporate greed, a man who would hold the rich accountable, ensuring they pay their fair share. But now, with these revelations, the real picture emerges. He is just another career politician who plays by the rules of the elite, while demanding sacrifices from the working class. And it gets worse. Many of these donors have direct financial interests in the very policies Starmer is shaping. Some are linked to industries that would benefit immensely from his economic decisions. So how can the British public possibly trust that his policies are truly in their best interests, when he is financially entangled with the very people who profit from their misery? It's an insult. While nurses, teachers, and workers face pay freezes, tax hikes, and cuts to public services, Starmer has been accepting luxury gifts from the very top of society. While families struggle to afford heating, he has been sipping champagne at elite gatherings, enjoying privileges that the average Briton could never dream of. This isn't leadership, it's hypocrisy of the highest order. And the British people are starting to wake up to the con. For too long, Starmer has relied on a carefully manufactured image, built on the premise that he is somehow different from other politicians. That he is above the corruption and cronyism that has plagued Westminster for decades. But now, the mask is slipping. And the truth is impossible to ignore. Even his own party is beginning to turn on him. Whispers of dissent are spreading within Labour, with many MPs deeply concerned about the impact of these revelations on their electoral chances. They know that if Starmer continues to be exposed, the party's credibility could take an irreversible hit. Some within Labour's own ranks are beginning to ask the uncomfortable question: is Keir Starmer becoming a liability? Because let's not forget, this scandal isn't happening in isolation. It comes at the worst possible time, with Liz Truss's lawsuit looming over him, threatening to force him into a legal battle that could further erode public trust. His failure to provide clear economic evidence to support his claims against Truss has already weakened his standing. And now, with the additional weight of this financial scandal, his position looks more fragile than ever. And here's what makes it even worse. Labour is meant to be the party of fairness and working-class representation. So how can it claim to fight for the struggling masses, when its leader is secretly living a life of unchecked privilege, while demanding higher taxes and tougher financial restrictions for the people he is supposed to represent? It's unsustainable. And the cracks are beginning to show. Even Labour's staunchest supporters are starting to express unease. Voters who once believed in Starmer's vision now feel betrayed. Because it's one thing for a politician to fail to deliver on promises, but it's another thing entirely to be caught blatantly benefiting from the very system he claims to oppose. And what happens when this scandal keeps growing? Because let's be realistic, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Now that the floodgates have opened, people are asking questions. What other undeclared benefits has he received? Who else has been funding his luxury lifestyle? And how much more is being hidden from the public? The media is starting to dig deeper, political opponents are circling like vultures, and Labour is in full damage control mode. And the worst part? Starmer's own strategy for dealing with the crisis is only making things worse. Instead of owning up to it, instead of coming clean, he is doubling down, dodging questions, avoiding scrutiny, and pretending nothing is wrong. But the British public isn't stupid. They know when they are being lied to. They know when a politician is more interested in power and privilege than in real change. And Starmer is running out of places to hide. As the scandal deepens, as more details emerge, as the Labour Party begins to question its own leader's integrity, there is only one certainty left: this is not going away. The longer Starmer refuses to face the truth, the more damaging this will become. Because once the public loses faith, once the voters turn their backs, there is no coming back. And at this rate, Starmer is on the fast track to political ruin. Keir Starmer's political empire is collapsing before our eyes. What started as a legal skirmish with Liz Truss has now spiraled into an all-out rebellion within his own party. The Labour leader who once projected an image of control, competence, and integrity is now fighting for his political survival, engulfed in scandal, deception, and betrayal. The lawsuit was just the beginning. What Starmer failed to anticipate was the domino effect it would trigger. His carefully crafted economic narrative has crumbled, his credibility has been shattered, and his party, once firmly behind him, is now tearing itself apart. Key figures within Labour are turning their backs, distancing themselves from a leader whose baggage is becoming too heavy to carry. Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves, and other Labour heavyweights are no longer defending him. The murmurs of discontent that once echoed behind closed doors are now public whispers of a coup. MPs, advisors, and party strategists are meeting in secret, plotting their next move. The concern is no longer if they will remove him, but how quickly they can do it before Labour's election hopes are completely obliterated. And then, the polling data drops. The numbers are devastating. What was once a comfortable lead over the Conservatives has evaporated. The voters who once saw Starmer as a viable alternative to Tory chaos are losing faith. Key constituencies that Labour had counted on are now swinging back into play. And it's not just the usual battle between the two major parties. Reform UK is gaining ground, peeling away disillusioned voters who feel betrayed by Labour's hypocrisy. Labour MPs are panicking. A leader who was supposed to be Labour's best chance at returning to power is now dragging the party into free fall. How long can they afford to keep him in place before he does irreparable damage? And then, the final blow lands. Liz Truss wins the legal battle. The courts rule that Starmer's claims about her economic impact were not only misleading but deliberately fabricated. Evidence surfaces that his team knowingly manipulated economic data, pushing a false narrative to justify his own failing policies. Emails leak. Internal communications expose how Labour's inner circle crafted a strategy to scapegoat Truss for problems of their own making. Suddenly, this is no longer just a political dispute, this is outright deception on a national scale. The headlines write themselves. Starmer exposed. Labour caught red-handed. A leadership crisis unlike any in modern political history. The pressure becomes unbearable. Labour's internal factions, already split between moderates and the left wing, go to war over what to do next. Do they force him out immediately? Or do they attempt damage control, knowing full well that keeping him in place might cost them the next election? But in the end, the decision is made for them. Keir Starmer cracks under the pressure. His advisors warn him that if he doesn't step aside now, the party will rip itself apart. His allies desert him one by one, unwilling to defend a leader who has become a liability. So, he folds. In a hastily arranged press conference, Starmer announces his resignation. He tries to frame it as a selfless act, insisting that he is stepping down for the good of the party and the country. But nobody is fooled. This was not a voluntary exit, this was a political execution. And the moment his resignation is made official, the power struggle begins. Who will replace him? Angela Rayner, Rachel Reeves, or perhaps a surprise outsider? The battle for control of the Labour Party erupts instantly, as factions fight to seize power before the next election. Meanwhile, the Conservatives waste no time capitalising on Labour's chaos. Rishi Sunak and his team go on the offensive, hammering home the message that Labour is unfit to govern. The Tories, despite their own issues, suddenly have an opening, and they will exploit it mercilessly. And what about Liz Truss? The woman who was once politically humiliated is now vindicated. She emerges from this not as a failed leader, but as the one who brought down Keir Starmer. Her reputation, once in ruins, has been rebuilt on the wreckage of Starmer's downfall. And Keir Starmer? His career is finished. The man who was once seen as Labour's great hope is now a cautionary tale. A leader who flew too close to the sun, only to come crashing down under the weight of his own deception, hypocrisy, and failed leadership. The Labour Party is now in turmoil. The next election is no longer a guaranteed victory. and the political landscape of Britain has changed forever.